Welcome back. This is the finishing up the Unit 14 Day 2 of notes for box plots and making the 5-number summary. We had gone through figuring out everybody's ages, and this was a box plot that definitely looked a little different, and that's okay. So when we talked about this, again, remember the 5-number summary includes the minimum, quartile 1, which is the median of the first half of the information, a median, which is the middle of the data, Q3, which is the median of the upper half of the information, or the bigger half of the information if there's a bigger and smaller, and then the max. All right, so make sure you got homework done, homework day 1 done, submitted when you're submitting that to Google Classroom. And when we looked at this stuff, some of you were identifying for the ages that we had a whole bunch of 15s, a whole bunch of 16s, 17, 21, and then the 47. All right, and definitely I remember 47 must be an outlier. So there is a way to calculate an outlier. And what we do, so on the next page, so part H here. So the data that lives between Q1 and Q3 is called the interquartile range, or IQR. What is the IQR from the previous page? All right, so IQR, Q1 and Q3. Now again, remember all the information here is kind of squashed together. It is 15 and 16. The IQR, the interquartile range, is just subtracting Q3 minus Q1. All right, so we have value of 1. So what percent of students' heights, whoopsie, sorry, another typo, students' ages we're talking about, are between Q1 and Q3? So again, remember Q1 and Q3, we're splitting up 100% of the data. From the minimum to Q1 was 25%, so Q1 was at the 25% mark. The median is the halfway mark, which is also Q2 at 50%. Q3 is at 75% of the data. And then the max would be the 100% of the data is going from smallest to largest. So if we're going from what percent of this is between Q1 and Q3, 75% minus 25% is your 50%. All right, so because of all this information being squashed together, it's a little bit hard to figure out, like, well, 47 definitely looks like a outlier, and I totally understand that. And everything was smashed together. So instead of just doing that, going back to the first day of notes when they're talking about the texts and the number of texts that people are sending, we looked at a histogram first on this stuff, but then a 5-number summary was determined from this information. So you didn't have to calculate, it's all there. The data's here for you if you want the data. But we have our Q1, we have our Q3, we have our min and our median and our max. All right, so we're gonna end up with something like this. All right, so this is for both Mom and Rachel. So the minimum, let's switch colors here. The minimum here is 0. That gets like a little bit of a dash of vertical line here. 275, that's on that end. It's another dash there. The median in the middle, so 75. Now, when you look at these, some of you are honestly going to be bothered because it is not necessarily going to be symmetric. There might be stuff on one side, the left side, more stuff on the right side. It might be in the middle, but again, it might not be. Q1 is going to be over here at 6. So every time you do these, you make up and down lines. You don't have to make different colors, but you can. Q1 is there. Q3 is at 150. All right, so when you have all these, so essentially you have 5 sticks up and down here. So what you do is you attach Q1 to Q3, and you make a box. Sometimes the boxes are bigger, sometimes they're smaller. And then from Q3, you extend it sometimes to the max. If you have outliers, it works a little bit differently. And Q1 you extend to the minimum. So this is called your box, and these are referred to as whiskers. Box plot has box and whiskers. So a box is all your information. When here at quartile 3, so this is 25% of your data. This is 25% of the data. So the IQR is those two together. Between the minimum and Q1 is 25% of the data as well. And then from Q3 over to the max is also 25% of the data. So that's where the information all is, where each of those 25 pieces of information are. Now it said, make sure you label the horizontal axis. So we have a title, number of text sent. Okay, so if you need to pause the video, pause it. Sometimes you're going to be just looking at them. Sometimes you're creating them and that sort of stuff. This is called a box plot. Now, a modified box plot is what we have looking at number 6. So prior to talking about the data with her mom, Rachel created a box plot using just her own data. And if you think back, this was 25 people answering her question, how many texts do you send? So Rachel's data was collected, and it looked a little different when they combined their data. All right, so this is, let's see, the 5-number summary. Oh, it looks a lot different. Okay, so this is referred to as a modified box plot. Okay, because there are outliers. All right, so the Q1 to Q3, the median, and this is going to look a lot different here. Okay, this time it said the minimum was 36, the max was 275. So this is just for Rachel, one person. The median is 144 of her data. Now remember, if all those pieces of information, we don't know who is who. We don't know out of all this information, we don't know which ones were the answers when Rachel asked people a question or when her mom asked people a question. Okay, so this is why it looks a little different. All right, these X's. So talking about these X's. Okay, the X's. So they are outside the whiskers of the box plot. So these are your whiskers. Whiskers. All right, the X's represent the outliers to Rachel's data. All right, so here's how we formally calculate where the whiskers should end and if there are any official outliers. So we started this up above. We're going to do Q3 minus Q1. Q3 minus Q1. 152.5 minus 133.5. And 2.5 minus 133.5. And we end up with the IQR of 19. So this left whisker ends at Q1 minus 1.5 times our IQR. Remember, this is your IQR inner quartile range. All right, so we do Q1, so 133.5 minus 1.5 times 19. So 133.5, subtract 1.5 times 19, and we get 105. Doop. Okay, and if you look up here, you can see 105, or on your other page, I apologize, you have to flip back and forth. This is at 105. That is where they're saying, hey, if you do this formula to figure out an acceptable range, anything past 105 or smaller than 105 is considered an outlier. So the stopping point is 105. Now, if the minimum value, we use the minimum value in the box and whisker plot if it is closer to Q1. Right now, our minimum is 36. That's not very close in terms of the number of texts. So we use this number of 105. The right whisker is Q3 plus. So Q3 is 152.5 plus 1.5 times your IQR. And really, it's just doing these, typing them in, 1.5 times 19. And we get 181 is our upper bound. And say anything above 181, it would be considered an outlier. Okay, so anything above here is considered an outlier. And since we have that 275 as part of our data, that is going to be considered an outlier. So any data points outside of these whiskers, so to the left or to the right, are referred to as the official outliers for sure. Okay, so when you do these calculations, sometimes you look at a box and whisker plot, you're like, I guess they have just made it so up here. Sorry, on the first page. They made this first box and whisker plot. And we're like, oh, that is minimum, max. They have all that sort of stuff on there. And then this is just referred to as a box and whisker plot. When you look at the right one, when they do the IQR and they have outliers here, this is referred to as a modified box and whisker plot. These pieces of information were not the same data, but just so you see one versus the other, how they look. When you see outliers, it's for sure called a modified box and whisker plot. If you don't see outliers and they don't tell you, you don't necessarily know if outliers were calculated or not. All right, so here's an example. Feel free to pause the video, stop it, and this is our last one here. Pause it, try the problem. I would highly recommend that pause, try it, and then I'm going to go through it. So here we go. A class of statistics students at Maine West conducted a survey with 120 responders. They asked a random sample of students how many minutes they spent watching Netflix this past Saturday. Below is a distribution of the number of minutes students spent watching Netflix on Saturday. Okay, so they labeled it. They have so we can't go past 0. So right now, this is just a box and whisker plot. There are no outliers that we see, so we're just going to call it box and whisker plot. As far as I know, this is the min, this is the max, this is Q1, this is the median, 75 is at the median, and Q3 is at 150. So first question, how many students watched between 0 and 10 minutes minimum to Q1? How many students watched between 150 to 275? Okay, so not the percent, but the percent is important. We have 120 students. And we're doing from 0 to Q1 here. That's 25% of the data lies here. So 0 minutes is 25%. So we use 120 times 0.25. Oops, sorry. It's a percentage. I believe that's 40. I'm just double checking. Yeah. Oh, nope. See? Good thing I checked. It's 30. So 30 students. Ah, silly. Should have broken down. Oh, well. Here we go. All right. And then Q3 to the maximum, 150 to 275. Remember, this is 25% of the data. So 150 to 275 minutes. As again, 25% of the data, and since nothing else changed, it's the same calculation, so I have 30 students. Okay, number 2, what percent of students reported that they watched between 75 and 275? All right, so starting at 75, which is 25% of the data, to Q3, and then another one, so from 70 to 275, that's 50% of the data. So that's 120 times 0.5, or half of 120, which is 100. Just kidding. Which is 60 students. Oops, sorry. Back that up. It just asked what percent, didn't it? Make sure you read. There we go. This is 30, and it said what percent. There we go. All right, identify an interval of minutes in which students, 75% of the students, watched Netflix. So there's 2 possible. Remember, I want 75% of the data, and each block here is 25. So we could do either 25, 50, 75. So it could be 0 to 150 minutes. Or if you had a different one, that's fine. Oh. You could start here at Q1, go to Q3, and then would be another 75. Or we start at Q1, which is 10 minutes, 10 to 275 minutes. All right, last one here. Many more students responses were added. Below is the new distribution of the number of minutes spent watching Netflix. So right away when I look at this, I see this as an outlier here. This is a modified box plot. All right, so there appears to be an outlier in the new set of data. Give its value. So its value is 350 minutes. All right, so to do this, to determine an outlier, we do the IQR, which is again Q3, subtract Q1. That's the 2 ends of the box. It's 150 minus 30. So the IQR is equal to 120. Now to figure out this upper area here, to figure out the range of like acceptable answers to be an outlier or not be an outlier, on the right side there, I do Q3 plus 1.5 times IQR. So Q3 is at 150 times 120. 150 plus 1.5 times 120. And I get 330. Now let's see the max of the data. So our maximum of the original data Our maximum of our original data didn't have all this on it. So we just looked at everything to the left. They added in this information, so we figured out that up to 50, that. The acceptable range to have or to start an outlier is anything above 330. Now, it's not made until 330. So they didn't extend the whisker all the way to here because our last bit of data, besides this 350 point, our last bit of data extended from Q3 or up to 275. So this was the acceptable space to not be an outlier. So it went up to the largest value without going over of 275, but the calculation of 350 was over what they determined to be an acceptable spot. So 330 was here. Since 350 was bigger than that, this is considered an outlier. Now, why don't we consider up to 330? Well, because our data, initial data or whatever they had, it didn't go up that high, so their data stopped at 275, but then it had this other thing to consider. So they had to stop the data there, like it said. The maximum value if it's closer to Q3. So I don't have the data in front of me, but whatever they had was, the last two numbers were 275 and 350. Since it doesn't go up to 330 here, and we go past it, it's considered an outlier. Try your hand at your homework. Turn in day 1 and day 2 to Google Classroom. Let me know if you have questions. I'll be around for office hours, and have a good weekend.